Hello, everyone, and welcome into Orange and Blue News, the Talk Illini Know Your Foe show with the number one Buckeyes coming in to play Illinois this coming Saturday. Big noon kickoff and all. I have Spencer from Letterman Row here to talk about the game with us. Spencer, why don't you tell me find your content at real fast before we get started?
Yeah, I'm just at Spencer Holbrook on all social media, and then we're over at Letterman Row, covering the Buckeyes 365 days a year. That's what we do.
There you go. So go check them out. All right, Spencer. So obviously, Buckeyes, number one team in the nation. This is a team that doesn't look like it has a whole lot of flaws on it. You got a Heisman level quarterback, a Heisman level receiver. Running backs are looking good this year, but you're starting the true freshman now, I believe, Bo Jackson. So very interesting stuff. But I think the thing everybody wants to hear about first is the quarterback, Julian Sayin, redshirt freshman. He's young, but he looks pretty impressive. What has been you and the Buckeye fans' thoughts of him so far this year?
He's been as advertised plus, I would say, as a former five-star quarterback, completing over 80% of his passes. He's accurate down the field. He's starting to learn how to use the middle of the field. Obviously, his playmakers kind of make it much easier on him than most quarterbacks would have it. But just because you play around good players doesn't mean that you're also a good player. And he's proving that he is more than capable of holding his own, uh, as his own guy, the quarterback of this team. And I think that that's one of the most impressive things that he's doing right now is he's his command of the offense, the ability to use the huddle. They're one of the slowest paced teams in the country because they want Julian Sayin to command the offense and not just run the offense. So, all of those factors have been really impressive. They didn't I don't know if I would use the word trust, but they didn't fully give him everything in that first game against Texas. Then they let him, roam free against Grambling because it was Grambling, and Ohio because it was Ohio. Reined him in a little bit more against Washington, but really started to cut that loose out there in Husky Stadium. And then from there, these last two games, he's been really, really good. And now you're starting to see the buzz pick up about just how good he is.
Now, this is going to be his second road start of his entire career, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so is there any concern there with Buckeye fans or anything with Julian Sayin going on the road? I know he just went to Husky Stadium, and that's one of the most difficult environments in the country, but any concerns about another road start?
Not necessarily. I thought they handled the silent count extremely well in that game out at Husky Stadium that we were at a couple weeks ago. He was really impressive in that game, and just they still commanded the huddle, even though there wasn't a lot that they could hear. They did a really good job on the offensive line with the silent count and making sure that they had that down. Luke Montgomery, the starting left guard, and Carson Hinsman handled the snap operation with the tap into the leg and things like that. And Julian Sayin was still able to convey his message that he needed pre-snap with everybody. Um, I'm not going to knock Memorial Stadium in any sense whatsoever, but Husky Stadium was extremely, extremely loud, and I thought Julian handled it pretty well. And I think if he can handle that kind of environment, I think he's primed to handle most environments that Ohio State will have to put him in this year.
Always helps too with how much the Buckeye fans travel. I know there seem to be a lot of Buckeye fans at any road game they go to, and so that's always for them as well. Since you mentioned the pass catchers earlier, we'll just go ahead and go to them. Wide receivers and the transfer, Max Klare, coming in from Purdue, very highly touted tight end as well. Going to talk about them. We all know they're very good, so I don't know if there's much more to add other than that, but wanted to make sure we gave time for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult to defend this offense because of what they do on the outside. If it was a slot receiver and then an outside receiver with Jeremiah Smith, if he had a slot companion, I think it would be a little bit easier to defend because there would be, you can probably find your matchups and still get a safety on these guys. But you have to have two really, really high level corners in order to defend these guys. And you also have to trust them man to man against Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith. And you basically have to have two corners who are NFL ready, who are going to be high level NFL draft picks because these guys are high level NFL draft picks. And so I think that's what makes it most difficult. And if you devote other resources beyond your corners out wide, that's when Max Klare can go down the middle and beat you the way that we've seen him do the last couple games a little bit more and more. That's when the run game can get going because you get a light box trying to defend, the deep passing game. And so I just think that these receivers, not only are they immensely talented, but they know their role to an extent where even if they're not getting the football, they're not angry about it because they know that this offense is moving because of them, even if it's not directly because of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Carnell Tate had a big game last week against Minnesota, and I saw some of the clips from that game. It looked like Minnesota was just kind of selling out to stop Jeremiah Smith. So it seems like if you try to sell out to stop any one of these guys, just the next one's going to hurt you. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Illinois tries to do this Saturday against them. Let's go to the backfield again. So I mentioned how Julian Sayin is a redshirt freshman. Ohio State didn't happen at the beginning of the season, but lately it seems like they've gone with the true freshman legs and one Bo Jackson. A couple other guys getting mixed in there as well. But what have been the thoughts and the analysis of the running back so far this season?
Yeah, it's an interesting room. We thought that it was probably going to be uh, James Peoples in the backfield, but he's been good, but not great. He had a good breakout in the second half of the blowout against Minnesota. How much of that is, about him? How much of it is about the fact that it was a blowout? But I mean, Bo Jackson has been everything they've needed and more. He didn't play at all in the Texas game, which is understandable. They didn't, not sure if they trusted him fully in a top 10 matchup like that. But then you hand him the keys against Grambling in the second half of that game, and he had 108 yards total. Then you hand him the keys again against Ohio with some carries in the first half, but mostly in the second half. He has 100 yards in that game. And then all of a sudden they give him a larger role against Washington. And he wasn't the starter, but he had double the carries of anybody else, 17 carries for 80 yards. And you think you might be onto something, so you give him a start against Minnesota, and he handled that really well. So is this an Ezekiel Elliott led Ohio State running back room, or a J.K. Dobbins led running back room like we're so used to seeing from these guys, or Travion and Quinshawn from last year? No, I don't think so. But you can see that Bo Jackson could become that eventually. And so I think that they really like the progress that he's made through these first few weeks. And then, like I said, James Peoples is coming into his own. He's starting to find his legs a little bit. And CJ Donaldson presents a battering ram there as the third down back that I think they really like, a guy from West Virginia who they thought was going to be maybe the lead back this year, but it turns out that's now Bo Jackson.
Interesting. So I am interested to hear about kind of the short yardage game from this Ohio State team because last year it was obviously very good. You had Quinshawn Judkins and you could mix in Travion Henderson. Those were two excellent backs. And not to take anything away from these guys, but Ryan Day has struggled a little bit with his short yardage game in the past and with a young running back room and, maybe a veteran who doesn't have the role that maybe some people thought he would. Is there any concern about the goal line, short yardage, 3rd and 2 type of run game, anything there?
Well, they were 5 of 7 last week on third and fewer than 4 yards. So that's a good step in the right direction. They missed a 4th and 1 against Washington, and they were really angry about that. They missed a 4th and short against Texas, but that was on a dropped pass that I don't think you'll ever see again from these Ohio State weapons. Overall, they've been pretty strong in short yardage, and if they haven't gotten it on third, they've usually gone for it on 4th and 1 and gotten it. They did try a couple of quarterback sneaks in this game, this past game against Minnesota, and they're finally putting that in. I think they finally feel confident that Julian Sayin is okay doing that, even though he's not that 6'4", 240 pounds the way that Will Howard was. So, I think that they're cleaning it up, and it was always correctable, but now they're starting to get it down where they feel more comfortable in those 3rd and shorts, 4th and shorts. And I did make the comment to one of my coworkers who also covers the team. Nobody gets in more 3rd-and-1s than Ohio State. It seems like every pickup they have is a 9 yards, and I don't understand how that's possible. I think it might just be a little glitch in the universe. But Ohio State seems to find itself in just a bevy of 3rd-and-1s every game, and then they have to convert a short yardage, and it becomes a big talking point. But I also think they take more 3rd-and-shorts than any team in the country somehow, and so it is something that I'm monitoring, but I don't think I would say it's a true concern right now.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, that'll be interesting to track in this one. Illinois feeling pretty good about short yardage situations with their defense so far this season. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Really important group in the short yardage situations is the offensive line. And if you want to kind of throw in, I know Ohio State has some blocking tight ends as well. So you can kind of throw some of those guys in here as well if there's any of them you want to talk about. But go through this offensive line. I know there were some question marks about it in the offseason. A lot of people said Ohio State didn't deserve to be the #1 team in the nation because of the offensive line. But I mean, I've watched this team all season. This offensive line seems to be better than what people made it out to be. What have been your thoughts on it so far?
I think it's a top 5 offensive line in America. They've only given up 2 sacks all season. They're barely having any pressure on Julian Sayin. Austin Sarabeld, who's the starting left tackle, who was a rotational guard last year. They moved to left tackle. I think he's only given up one pressure the entire year, and that's including a game against Colin Simmons, who's one of the best defensive ends in America. The Washington group that I think is a pretty good defensive line. He's been absolutely stellar on the left side, and the guy who lines up beside him at left guard, Luke Montgomery, is just an absolute road grader. He's one of those old school, nasty style guards from the Midwest that I know Illinois knows all about. If you think of like a Big Ten guard, you should think of Luke Montgomery right now. He's just an anchor in there at left guard. Carson Hinsman's a second-year starter at center with a gap year, I would call it, because he started at center when he wasn't ready as a second-year player in 2023 and struggled. And so they brought in Seth McLaughlin last year to teach him the ropes. McLaughlin wins the Remington Award, but tears his Achilles in November. And so for the Indiana game, the Michigan game, and then the national championship run, Hinsman was the starting center, and then he comes back this year. So he's got almost 20 starts under his belt, even though he took a gap year in his starting experience. Now, the right side's a little bit more interesting. They took Phillip Daniels from Minnesota out of the transfer portal. He's a really nasty, mean streak kind of guy. He's been pretty good, but sometimes he can get in his head a little bit and have a penalty or two. But I think overall he's been a really good piece on the right side of the offensive line. And then Tegra Chabola, who's got the most starting experience of anybody on this offensive line, but at the same time has been like a rotational guy because they've been trying Ethan Onianwa in there. They tried Josh Padilla, in there, who's a third-year guy, a former wrestler. So there's some movement at the right guard spot. It's definitely not a bad spot, but I should say of the five, right guard might be the weakest, but I think that's kind of a relative term because of how good this offensive line's been. I have a lot of respect for the people who put together the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line, and Cole Kubelik is one of them. He does a really good job breaking down offensive line play, and he said that they're the most fun offensive line to watch on film so far this year. So not only are they grading the road and they're good, but they're also like, you can see some fun in watching that offensive line. And I think to watch them work has been kind of a joy through 5 games of this season. It goes really underrated too, obviously, because there's so many weapons out wide that you want to talk about them, but the offensive line kind of makes this thing go.
Yeah, just a lot to talk about on this Ohio State offense as per usual. So very interesting stuff. Let's go ahead and switch over to the defensive side of the ball, and this is where for Illinois there's going to be some questions about some matchups because Illinois does possess a few players that have been really big for them so far this season. Let's go ahead and start with the secondary because Hank Beatty is the all-purpose yardage leading player in the nation. He's been fantastic this season. Returning, rushing some, receiving some. I mean, he basically does it all for this Illinois offense, and he primarily works out of the slot. Now, I know Caleb Downs is in this defense. I know Davison Igbinosin came back last year. He's very highly thought of. The slot situation looking like in this Ohio State secondary, and could Hank Beatty maybe find a little bit of a path here to be able to make some big plays?
I think it's all dependent on if Illinois has the ability to block this Ohio State defensive line. I don't mean to make that about the defensive line because we're talking about the secondary, but like you flip on Duke and you flip on Indiana, and the first thing you notice is like, man, they really got after Luke Altmaier, and like it doesn't matter who you have at receiver if you're not blocking. And I think that this Ohio State defense in general is just a step up from both of those groups. So that's where I would start there. But I do think, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Hank Beatty. I think he's one of the best all-purpose players in America, and the stats bear that out. Obviously, I mean that's an obvious statement, but at the same time, like I try to watch as much college football as I can, and he just stands out. He's everywhere, and he's a bear to try to defend. Ohio State's going to use Jalen McLean, who's a starting safety out there, deep safety to help on that. They're going to use Lorenzo Styles Jr., who's a former wide receiver who transferred in from Notre Dame, who has been really good so far this year, but he's kind of a smaller guy. They're going to use Caleb Downs in trying to stop him. I think they're going to use Jermaine Matthews, who's a starting corner, probably moving around a little bit into that slot. He's done that some. And then obviously Davison Igbinosin would love to get a matchup because he's the most physical corner potentially in the Big Ten, and he's going to get matched up against him a little bit as well. I think it's going to be a group effort. This secondary is proven to be one of the best in the country. Obviously, that has a lot to do with defending outside receivers, and Hank Beatty presents a little bit of a different challenge. I'm also curious to see what Colin Dixon does, just because if you devote a lot of attention, it's almost a little bit of the Ohio State light, where if you devote a lot of attention to Hank Beatty, I think there's a chance for Colin Dixon. So, this secondary is going to have to be really good. But luckily, they've got some really serious pass rushing chops in front of them to be able to kind of, help take away those receiving options, I think, in a way.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go next with Colin Dixon, and then also Justin Bowick on the outside there as well. He's kind of a bigger body wide receiver and does a lot of damage to teams in the red zone. Say Illinois does get down to the red zone this season or in this game, and I know Ohio State has not allowed a single red zone touchdown all season. That's a huge accomplishment by them. Obviously, one of the best, if not the best defense in the nation. Has Ohio State gone up against a true kind of red zone threat, bigger wide receiver that they've had to devote a number of players to or anything this season? What's your thoughts about a bigger wide receiver in Justin Bowick?
Yeah, probably not. I don't think they've probably seen a receiver like that yet. Maybe Parker Livingstone, who plays one of the outside receiving spots for Texas, who's a really big body. He did have a touchdown, but it was when the game was 14-0, and it kind of seemed like Ohio State was playing a little bit of like a prevent style. That was a longer touchdown, so it wasn't in the red zone. I mean, the reason that they haven't given up a red zone touchdown yet this season is because it's really difficult to run against this team in the red zone, and they get you in 3rd and long in the red zone, and then you're throwing into a defense that kind of pins its ears back and rushes the passer and is really sticky in coverage and disguises all of their coverages. And when the field shrinks, it's even easier to disguise your coverages because you don't have as much ground to cover. And so that's been the calling card of this defense. I once said, I think it was after the 3rd game of the year, that Ohio State has hung its defensive hat on not letting the opponent know which hat rack it's even going to choose. So, they just disguise everything. They just keep everything, under wraps until almost after the snap. And then all of a sudden it's chaos in the back end, and it confuses, even really good, smart quarterbacks. And I think that Luke Altmaier, being a veteran, has seen just about everything there is to see in college football. But this Matt Patricia defense makes it to where this isn't a college football defense. This is an NFL defense and NFL concepts that are being run in college. And I think that's what makes this a little different. So, it's a wonder if they're going to face, once they face this Illinois team, I think we'll have a better sense of who these guys truly are in the red zone. But I will say, it's been difficult to get to the red zone against this team too. And I think that helps with the red zone numbers. Yeah, they haven't given up a touchdown, but they also haven't faced that many red zone possessions because of how good the defense has been between the 20s.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody the other day about this team, and I was saying, like, well, the Minnesota game and how Minnesota got down to the red zone. It was like, okay, this is where the real defense starts. Not that they don't play, obviously, defense outside of that, but it was like, okay, good luck, Minnesota, because this defense is just kind of money in the red zone, and we'll see how it plays out. All right, so let's go to the front seven now. I think this is probably where it all kind of starts with the disguising and everything else, because you can see linebackers, you can see defensive linemen, you can see Caleb Downs, maybe some of the cornerbacks get up there as well sometimes. I mean, they really do an amazing job of disguising what is going on. And also, I mean, they've used their linebackers as like defensive tackles before a few times. I know Arvo Reese he's a big name that kind of lines up there in the middle. Give us some of the thoughts on the front seven, the pass rush, who are the best pass rushers on this team so far. Just general thoughts there.
Yeah, let's start inside. Caden McDonald is playing at an all Big Ten level right now at defensive tackle. He's just an absolute load to try to get your hands on and defend and block, in the teeth of that defense. And I think he goes pretty well with a combination of Edric Houston and Tywan Malone, the 2-3 techniques that play on the interior. But those guys, almost have their jobs helped out a little bit by these linebackers, because Arvo Reese and Sonny Styles fly from every level of the defense. Sometimes Caleb Downs comes down into the box and serves as a third linebacker. Sometimes in heavier sets, you're going to see Peyton Pierce as a linebacker come in and play a little bit of that. You say that you're going to start on the interior, but everybody plays on the interior. Caden Curry, who's the team's leader in sacks and tackles for loss, has taken pass rush snaps at wide defensive end, at standard defensive end, and at nose tackle. He's lined up a few times directly ahead of the center and pass rush from there. And he's a really quick, high motor guy who can get home from anywhere. So, they will throw, it's like on the video games when you used to play with the pitchers in MLB where they've got like 11 pitches that you can choose from. You don't even know which. They will throw so many different things at you in this front. Arvo Reese plays defensive end some. He plays linebacker. He runs sideline to sideline. Sonny Styles is the same way. This is the most athletic linebacker group Ohio State maybe has ever had. And they're really instinctual as well. So it's hard to really decide where they're going to be. One of the things Patricia did last week against Minnesota, It was a second down play, and it was just a standard down in the middle of the field. And Patricia took his two linebackers and made them the defensive ends. And then he put both of his defensive ends in the A gaps, double A gap. And then they all four dropped into coverage, and they only rushed three guys, but they brought one of the safeties from the secondary. So it was like, you have no clue when any of that's going to happen until it's already happened. And then you're in trouble because you couldn't dissect it pre-snap. So is this front seven the best front seven in America? I would probably say no, even though I think these two linebackers are two of the best linebackers in America. But the way that he deploys them makes them look like they're the best in America, because it's so hard to figure out what they're going to do. And so by the time you figure out what they're going to do, it's probably already too late, because they've got the speed of a team that recruits at this level. And I know that it probably sounds like I'm talking gushingly of these guys, but this is a defense that has allowed 5 points a game, 25 points overall in 5 games. And it's been remarkable to watch, because I did think they were going to take a small step back on the defensive side this year, and they just haven't.
Yeah, I mean, this is the number one team in the nation, so at this point, it's kind of hard to find weaknesses and work through that stuff. But that's why they pay the coaches the big bucks, because they got to go in and try and figure it out. So, last thing I'll ask here on the defense: how has Ohio State done against some more mobile quarterbacks? Now, Luke Altmaier is no Michael Vick or anything like that, but he does utilize his mobility and does a pretty good job of knowing when to tuck the ball, get out of bounds, and utilize those things. He's not going to go for a 60-yard run most likely, but he could scramble, pick up a first down, and keep the drive alive. How has Ohio State done? I know they faced Parker Navarro at Ohio, Arch Manning, even though his season hasn't gone as kind of hoped for. He has some mobility as well. How's Ohio State done against guys like that so far?
Yeah, the big one is Damon Williams from Washington, who got loose a couple times on the opening drive and then was completely non-existent in the run game after that. He ended up with 13 carries, but his rushing line is so skewed because they sacked him 6 times. So he was 13 carries for negative 28 yards. But he had 20 rushing yards just standard. They've done a really nice job of bottling these guys up, and it is a question of how they're going to treat Luke Altmaier. Do they treat him as a good scrambling quarterback and try to hem him in the pocket and make him beat him with his arm? Because I do think he has the capability of doing that if you give him time. But also the linebackers sometimes look like they're spying and they're just in the hook to curl, but really they're so athletic that they can get there in time to get him down, and they're really good tacklers. So, I think that they'll probably go back to the well of what they did against Washington, where you have a really good wide receiver to defend in Denzel Boston, Hank Beatty. You have a really good rushing quarterback to defend in Damon Williams. Luke Altmaier's slippery like that. Parker Navarro, same way. They've got a really good receiver there in Chase Hendricks, and Parker Navarro is slippery quarterback. And I think that's the way I would describe Altmaier. Is you just see it on film. It's slippery. He has a way of slipping away from things and picking up a few yards that you weren't expecting to give up. Ohio State's going to have to do a really good job of that. Now, they've kind of shown that they can against Navarro and against Williams, but I think Altmaier has a little bit more of that veteran savvy in him than those two guys do as younger players, or not as accomplished players. He knows when to get the yards, how to get the yards, and why he's getting them. And so I think it's going to be important for Ohio State to kind of hem him in the pocket, make him, make the offensive line give him time to make decisions into the secondary, and not let him pick up, 6 on first down when he's dropped back to pass.
Very good, very good. Now, I do apologize. I lied. I have one last question. Special teams. How have the special teams been for Ohio State so far this season?
They've been hit or miss. Jaden Fielding's really good at kicking field goals on the road. He missed a 53-yard field goal last week. The 50-plus yard field goal thing has been a hot topic for Ohio State, because everybody thinks that everyone should have a 50-yard field goal kicker, and I fully understand that. So, I mean, that's something to watch, but I don't know if Ohio State will attempt 50-yard field goals moving forward, just because they didn't make their last one. They did pull a trick play on a punt return last week and threw it across the field to a kind of a hidden punt returner and picked up 30 cheap yards there, I would call them. The kickoff and punt team have been decent. The punt return game is actually kind of dangerous. Brandon Ennis back there, he's got a knack to finding a hole. He had a 30-some yard return against Ohio, and then he had a 28-yard return against Washington, but he fumbled, but he's a team captain, and they trust him to stay back there. So, if he's got a crease, he's going to take a crease and make you pay for it. They were really, really close last week to blocking a Minnesota punt. And I know that, and I believe that they've probably taken note of the way that Indiana was able to block that punt at the beginning of that game. But the one thing that Ohio State has continued to preach, and I think it even applies on special teams, is that Indiana game is more of a fluke than anything. And Ryan Day said that he views this as a top 10 game because he's thrown out the Indiana game completely. And if you throw out the Indiana game, Illinois would still be a top 10 opponent. And so he is making sure that this team understands what they're walking into. And I think that even applies to special teams. They're probably just throwing out that Indiana game altogether.
Yeah, that Indiana game, interesting one. There were so many injuries and stuff like that. Not
Yeah.
that it's an excuse, but at a certain point when you have other guys in, you know what? I'll agree with Ryan. He's a smart guy. He knows what he's talking about. So
I mean, he seriously, he stood up there and, you know, somebody asked him, like, how do you level with your players? And look, Ohio State actually has a perfect comparison for this because last year, Nebraska went on the road and lost 56-7 at Indiana. And so the very next week, Nebraska came to Columbus and Ohio State sleptwalked through that game and was losing with 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter and needed a touchdown drive with 3 minutes to go to score a touchdown and win that game 21-17. And so Ryan Day has kind of pointed to that and saying, hey, just because this team got blown up by Indiana, you guys were all in this building. You know that last year, Nebraska almost beat us after getting blown up by Indiana. And so it's almost to Illinois' detriment that Ohio State's saying throw that Indiana game out because, you know, they didn't throw the Nebraska-Indiana game out last year, and then they sleptwalk into that game. This time they're on high alert because they know that the Indiana game is absolutely 100% not what they're going to get out of Illinois on Saturday. And I think that's the most important thing. It's going to be kind of a dogfight, and I think everybody knows that.
Well, you know, that won't stop some of the fans on Twitter from having transitive property conversations and the score and everything. So we'll all have that to look forward to, if nothing else. So, Spencer, thank you so much for your time going through talking about the Buckeyes and kind of this Know Your Foe series we're doing right now. Anything else going on you want to let people know about? Letterman Row, your Twitter handle, stuff like that?
Yeah, it's right down here. Down there.
There you
go. At Spencer Holbrook. I'm basically everywhere. If you want to heckle me, if you want to come talk Ohio State football, come to lettermanrow.com. We have a good time on the message board, and you know, you guys are doing a great job over there covering the Illini as well. So, you know, I think we have a pretty good Big Ten community at On3, and so it's good to connect with you guys.
Very good. Yes, appreciate you doing this, Spencer, and thank you everybody for listening and watching. Definitely go check out Letterman Row. Do some espionage over there on the board. Okay, see what they're talking about, see what they're thinking of. It's one of the best things about the On3 subscription with what you can do over there. So thank you everybody. Have a good one. See you next time.